Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you for attending, choosing to be here today, and making this event actually a special one for all of us. So I'm the third chairman of the organization. I have the pleasure to be the third chairman of the organization, Macedonia2025. So for me, this is extremely pleasurable and proud experience to actually be part of another successful event, hopefully, for our organization. But before I go into this panel and talk a little bit about the topic of the panel, I would like to also thank and introduce our panelists here today. We have a very amazing individuals. So actually, one of them, the first one, Nika Gilauri, is actually this is his second summit. Nika we had the pleasure of having him here last year. So Nika, thank you again for coming here before. So let me give a little bit of a background to Nika. He's currently the founding partner and managing director of Reformatics. He was previously head of the Bank of Georgia's Turkish office. He's a senior advisor at McKinsey & Company. And he was actually the last position, he was a prime minister of Georgia, Republic of Georgia. So the one thing about Nika is he actually was instrumental and one of the most helpful people as far as how we thought about developing the dashboard. So I want to thank you as well for being so helpful to us thinking this through. And actually, we had a series of calls. I remember the very first call we had with Nika. He took us through the reforms and the metrics he tracked in Georgia to transform the country. And we all ended the call and we said, Nika, I said, you know, you could be great president in Georgia, great prime minister, maybe even in Macedonia, but why don't you come to the United States and be a president of United States? That we all felt the same on the call after having the pleasure to speak to him. The second panelist is Vlado Dimovski, who I had the pleasure of meeting recently in an event in Austria. So Vlado, thank you for coming to the summit as well. Vlado is of a Macedonian heritage, but he's also Slovenian. What I like about Vlado is he's currently the professor, PhD professor at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. And he specializes in organizational learning, knowledge management, leadership. He likes to teach. Now, he was also a consultant to one of the prior Macedonian governments, and also senior advisor, and also he was actually a member of the government between 2000 and 2004 of Slovenia as a minister of Labor, Family, and Social Affairs. And what's interesting about that team, this is the team that took Slovenia into the European Union. And so when I had the pleasure to speak to Vlado, the first impression left with me, he said, you know, we had a job to do, we got it done, and he said, then I decided to go back to do what I really like to do, which is teach. So Vlado, thank you for being here with us today. And then the third participant, but not the least, Kosta Barjaba, who I also had the pleasure to speak recently to. Thank you for coming here today. He actually comes from our neighbor, Albania. He is a senior policy advisor to the Minister of Health of the Republic of Albania, also a professor of sociology and public policies of European University of Tirana. Now, Kosta has been in some form or fashion in public service for the past 20 years, I would say. And when I have, you know, last time I went to Albania, it's embarrassing, I should go again today to see the country because I know what has happened to the country since. I went in 1988, so with my father and a few people, and so my memories of Albania is 1988, going to Tirana, one road going into Albania, one road coming out, two lights in downtown Tirana where you had to stop. It was red light and there was the only intersection in the whole town. And the country went from there, very much more communistic country, neighbor, right, our first Western neighbor, to in 2003, beginning negotiations with the European Union to becoming a member of the European Union. So an amazing progress over 20 years, and I look forward hearing from him exactly what they did, what magic they did to kind of push the country from there to where it is today. So congratulations again. Now, this is a little bit of an unusual panel because I'm also a presenter, so I'm sorry I'm going to talk a little bit longer. It's not going to be common with the rest of the chairs of the panels. What we decided last year was the passion of the directors of Macedonia2025 is, as Mike mentioned, was to really make Macedonia a stronger nation. So then we said, okay, well, we are all business folks, and we like to have tangible goals and tangible outcomes, and we want to measure how we get there. And the initial catalyst and the challenge we as a board gave to Mike, actually, at one of the board meetings a couple of years in person, we said, Mike, you need to come up with some tangible goals for our organization for the next 10 years. So why don't you go over there, think about it, come back by the next 3 board meetings from now, and come up with a strategy for the organization. So we started talking, and we started actually collaborating with a few organizations, the Economic Development Board of Singapore. We started talking to Nika, Gilauri. We started talking to McKinsey. We started talking to Economic Development Board of Turkey. And we started realizing, and Mike came back and said, he said, it's kind of hard to have goals for the organization, but we really want to make the country better. We got to really think about the goals for the country, and those then need to be the goals for the organization, which I think made sense after he kind of verbalized it for us. So then we said, okay, well, that's great. So now why don't you go out and come up with what the target should be for the country? So we went through a process, and we developed this dashboard, which, I'll talk a little bit about this, the dashboard. But what it really did for our organization is did the most actually fundamental change last year. And we did it very quietly. We didn't make a too big deal out of it. And at the board level, we kind of got behind it, which is we flipped the organization back from a program-driven organization, platform-based organization to more, again, think tank. Going back to what originally was meant to be. And then we put all of our projects and programs below the think tank, such that we basically said anything we do as an organization should facilitate making the country better. And so then we're going to have the dashboard. Let's measure that progress. But now from this point on, we got to measure the impact of all of our projects. And so one of the biggest now challenges that I have as a chairman and with working with our executive director, Ljubljana, and the rest of the board, is to really create a fully functioning think tank. What you're going to see from us going forward is 3 things. And I like to kind of emphasize 3 things. One is communicate. Hopefully by communicating, stimulating certain things, and also then as part of the stimulation, starting to develop ideas and solutions for kind of moving the country forward. Okay? Now, that's a competency that we currently are just beginning to actually implement in our organization. But what you're going to see from us going forward is real strategic focus of adding talent at the board level, especially at some of our additional membership functions. We're going to start establishing partnerships, and you're going to see being more vocal and more outspoken about what we believe the country needs to do on a more regular basis from a standpoint of moving in the right direction, right? Now, come back to this dashboard. And I think of this dashboard as a scorecard. Yes, it is a scorecard. But I like to think of it a little bit more of, there's a word, it's like a panel. And panel of, I would say, I'll make an analogy here. So please hang with me here. I'm going to make a little bit of a funny analogy. One of my favorite inspirational series I used to like to watch when I was growing up was Star Trek. So I think of, Jean-Luc Picard sitting in the Enterprise starship and saying, you know what, let's go beyond our imagination and let's explore where we can go. And I think of this dashboard a little bit of a panel of that starship. Okay, how do we measure where we're going, which direction, how fast, how slow, but at the same time, what do we need to think about to feed the engine so it goes faster, slower, or in the direction we want it to go to? So that's how I think about it. And then I think the humankind that benefits from the enterprise exploration is really the country. So we're going to go and dare to challenge ourselves and really think out of the box and come up with really some thoughtful, interesting conversations. And I have some questions for the speakers here because one of the things we would like to do is stimulate a discussion. This is not meant to be, the dashboard is not meant to be, actually can be whatever you want it to be, but we would like it to stimulate a conversation. I think that's probably the beginning of a series of steps towards getting to potentially figuring out how to address some of those issues that we are trying to address. So to me, this is kind of, I think, something that you guys should think about, and I think it's again, something we really spend a lot of time thinking through. And the challenge I set for Ljubljana, we're actually having these discussions on sometimes daily basis, is I said, let's challenge to be great in this. We want to be maybe a think tank, not just for Macedonia, not for this region, not for this capacity, but really be a think tank that's excellence and perceived to be excellent, not only in Macedonian terms, but also in regional, continental, and also global terms. So we're going to have to attract some talent. We're going to have to be very crafty how we do this. But I can see in 5 to 10 years from now, the Gulf of Ljubljana, maybe we have the country, the neighboring country of Bulgaria or Serbia outsource some of their research to us. Why not? We have the capacity we should have the capacity to do it. So this is something we really, really seriously are going to step on the paddle to start delivering for the next 5 to 10 years. One of the best, my favorite sayings that are dear to me, that I get to hear very often from a dear friend of mine, Mike. Mike likes to say, he says, do the best you can with what you have where you are. And that's a very interesting statement to me because it's actually a very positive statement. It's a very optimistic statement, right? There's and for us out there and everybody who's in business understands you got to wake up every day, show up to work, get your employees motivated, be a leader, and then hopefully in the process, your actions and hard work produce results, and you can, look at the bank account, and you can look the value you're creating not for yourself, for your family, for your employees, and for the community, is the most rewarding thing you can do for yourself and for the environment around you. So what we would like to do is for this to be really inspirational. If you look at some of the, let's see how this goes. Okay, there we go. Some of the targets, we have them on the websites. We're going to start publishing them very, very, very regularly. As regularly as we're going to have the capacity to produce them. This is, by the way, sourced by all third-party, world-renowned sources, the World Economic Forum, World Bank, I forget some of the sources here, Freedom House, Transparency International. So this is not something that we've produced ourselves. We felt, by working with McKinsey and Nika and some of the other collaborators, we felt these are probably the right 14 metrics. So this is the growth measures, and then on the next page, we have the growth enablers. They're on our website. We actually have a detailed presentation that actually shows how we actually determine these are the right metrics that we should track. But we hope by 2015, the target, which is 2025, we really make a substantial move in the right direction here, right? And I think the country has done in many ways, many things that progress the country in a good direction. You can look at some of the, I would say, growth measures, GDP per capita, right? There's been some tremendous growth from 2005 to 2015. Now, are we still there? No, we're still, by 2015, we're 19 out of 35 countries, right? This is a peer set of about 33 to 35 countries. We're still kind of midway through the road. Now we would like to be a leader. Why stay at $5,000 per capita as a GDP for the country, right? The unemployment rate has been coming down, but we are still the lowest ranked as from the peer set countries, right? So there's quite a bit to go forward from where we are today. The FDI spending, we've made some significant progresses. We're 25 out of 35. We would like to be 5% target in 10 years from now. On the growth enablers, we felt, you can track economical indicators, but I think you got to also look at the kind of social aspect. What's the input, the human capital, the investment? What are all the resources the country has at its disposal that it controls how much to deploy towards driving those measures? And we have also there quite a bit to go forward to. And I think, to me, this is actually exciting. I was sitting recently in I have actually one of my mentees here who is a CEO of a company. And I love this mentee of mine. I sit on the board of his company, and we always talk about it. And we had a presentation with a group of investors. And this investor didn't get what the strategy for the thing is and the opportunity, the size of the opportunity. And then we left of the meeting, and the CEO was depressed. He said, my God, nobody gets what we're trying to do and how massive this opportunity is. And I was laughing. I said, well, this is really good, because if he realizes that, that means that maybe it's not, then everybody else does, and that means that there's going to be more competition. That means that we have much more room to go. So I think you got to look at this as an opportunity for us to actually go higher. If we're already number one, I'll tell you something. One of the hardest things to do in sports is to once you become number one, is to stay at number one. That's why there's not that many repeat champions in any sports. So with that, my part is over. I would like to invite Nika. Nika, your time. Yep.
Thank you very much for kind words and for introduction. Thank you very much, actually, everybody, especially Mr. Zafirovsky, for this opportunity. It's my second time here in this event, and it's my pleasure to be here, my honor to be here. I especially want to thank Biljana for amazing work that she's been doing for past 2 years. I've been in touch with her for the past 2 years, and it's amazing, and thank you very much for that. About dashboard and about the topic that I'm supposed to touch during my short speech. It's about driving economic reforms in emerging markets and how these reforms can be sustainable. First of all, let me say a few words about dashboard, and thank you very much for saying that, yes, I did contribute something in that. The reason why I did so, actually, why it was easy for me to do so, because we had very similar thing in Georgia. And it wasn't an only dashboard, it was more of a key performance indicators for ministers and key performance indicators for people who were in charge of these reforms. Just to give you a couple of examples, for example, for doing business, Georgia jumped from 112th place to number 8 in the world in a very short period of time, which is, I think, the only country that has done this kind of transformation in a short period of time. I mean, we had very specific people who were in charge of that, but guess what? We, on top of this being in charge, we had a private sector structure in the government, according to which these people who were in charge of these different parts of the dashboard would get bonuses, actual bonuses for themselves and for them to give bonuses to their employees. For example, Minister of Energy had bonuses for exporting electricity, Ministry of Economy would have bonuses based on FDI to GDP, and so on and so on. Some chief, for example, advisor to Prime Minister for economic reforms had bonuses for doing business, and so on and so on. So it was not only dashboard which was tracked, but this dashboard needs to be fulfilled by specific persons, specific organizations, and they have to realize that they need some additional motivations. So how do you calculate what should be the bonus for these people? I believe that private sector vis-a-vis for each public sector individual, based on their revenues, you can identify what can be the relevant bonus for this or that person in the government structure, be it minister, deputy minister, chief advisor, and so on, and so on, and so on. It's just a controversial idea that I want to start my speech with regarding the dashboard. Keeping track is good, but motivating somebody to excel in those specific areas can work even better. And for example, in our case, we had few indicators which were common for all government members. It was GDP growth, it was sovereign Eurobond yield. Why? Sovereign Eurobond yield actually affects the whole economy, affects the banking sector interest rates, affects the private sector, affects SMEs, affects individuals. If government can manage to decrease the yield, if government can manage to decrease the risks, and government can manage to increase the rankings of the country overall, then you have a serious shift in the economy, then you have a serious shift in actually everybody's business. SMEs, large investors, as well as multinationals. So I believe that this kind of common goal for the whole government was very important in case of Georgia, and it worked quite well. It worked for government of Georgia as a kind of team working together for common goal, and plus they knew that there was actually financial benefit for them specifically and for their employees to motivate them. In some cases, it was to motivate them not to go to private sector, by the way. Let me go to the main topic of my speech, which is driving economic reforms in the current world. First of all, just let me describe you the current situation. I'm sure you've heard it all, but just to make it kind of preface to my speech. Definitely, the situation is very volatile, and nobody really can forecast many things right now in the current economic world. Some people are blaming on China, some experts are blaming on oil prices, some experts are blaming on increased risks in geopolitics, some experts are blaming on Russia, and some are blaming on Donald Trump, and the others are blaming on Syria problems, and so on and so on. Yes, the reality is that we have all those problems. And the world is facing new challenges because of that, totally new realities. And most of the companies are scared. The investments are decreasing. The competition for investments are increasing. And top of that, we are facing situation, for example, according to OECD, this year's growth of trade, world trade, will be less than this year's world output growth, which is, by the way, one of the 40 years that this has happened in the past 50 years' time. And every time this has happened, nothing good has come out of that. So if you are thinking of, anybody thinks that the world crisis or this downturn is over, unfortunately, as it seems, it's not fully over yet. Plus, because of the interventions from central banks, we are facing a significant decrease in interest rates, which is kind of misplacing the pricing of different assets. So some kind of reversal can happen and should happen in the valuation of many assets going forward, which will introduce additional volatility in the Europe, in developing world, as well as in the worldwide. In this situation, you have countries who are actually competing with each other to attract FDI, countries that are competing with each other to attract tourists, countries that are competing with each other to attract more jobs, and so on and so on. So Macedonia has done very well, if you ask me, and if you put it bluntly, the performance has been amazing in the past years. But it's not time to stop now, especially considering all those realities which this region and the world is facing coming forward. So, what should be the drivers of the growth for the economy? As we can see, in many countries, monetary policy only has worked, but cannot work alone. Definitely, fiscal policy has to be introduced significantly, and definitely we need structural reforms together, hand in hand. I will talk about structural reforms later because many experts are mentioning structural reforms, but then nobody really underlines what exactly do they mean by structural reforms. It's a very nice combination of words. Let's have structural reforms, and everybody agree. And everybody says, let's have structural reforms, and everybody's happy and go home. But what exactly do we mean by structural reforms? Before going there, I would like to mention one more controversial idea. It's about monetary policy and fiscal policy. Few years ago, in early 80s, or maybe late 70s, because some governments misused central bank resources for election purposes to drive growth and don't care about inflation, it was rightfully so introduced a policy where central bank had to be independent. But time has gone since then. Lots of years has gone since then. And maybe time has come to rethink that policy. Right now, the world is not facing inflation. Most of the world, developed world especially, is not facing inflation. On the contrary, most of the developed world is scared of deflation. And Japan, what has gone through Japan in the past 20 years, what is happening in EU right now is a very good example of that. Every now and then, world has to rethink its own rules. Breaking the rules on time is called innovation. Breaking the rules never is called stupidity, sometimes. So, let's innovate, and what I'm proposing is not saying that central banks should be under government or their independence has to be taken away, but definitely many countries, and maybe Macedonia amongst them, and need a new venue. Let's call it fiscal monetary policy venue, where Minister of Finance, Prime Minister, Head of Central Bank, maybe even Chairman of Parliament, come together once every 6 months, which is official venue, because I know that this is unofficially happening in many countries. Unofficially, many central bankers and ministers of finance realize that without each other, they cannot drive reform. So everywhere, almost everywhere, they come for lunch once every 2 months or so. But that's in case they like each other. But what if they don't like each other? So let's create an institution where these people come together and they actually have 3-year, 5-year, 6-year, 7-year fiscal and monetary policies together, balanced with each other, which I believe, of course, any of one of them has to have a veto right. By that, you don't take independence of central banks away, but the venue where they coordinate and where they communicate to public their fiscal and monetary policies paths for future, I believe can be an important part. About structural reforms. What do we mean by structural reforms? I mean, let's give it a look from private sector's point of view. And from private sector's point of view, I would call structural reforms anything that makes doing business easier in a country. Anything that makes easier to register business, register property, register contract. Anything that doesn't take extra time from private sector to do all those things, to interact with the government and not pay bribes, and to do it in the shortest possible way, to do it in an environment which is friendly, customer friendly, instead of going to government members or public sector representatives who think that they are the bosses. Any reform of that type, I believe, can benefit the country immensely. We saw in Georgia very simple transformation. Georgia went from 112th place. By the way, doing business report is very, very good tool for that. It's not 100% correct, of course, nothing can be 100% correct, but it is amazingly good tool to adjust, to understand country's business environment performance. And we saw Georgia went from 112th place to number 8, and from 2006, the period is 2006, 2012 or 2013. So 7 years' time, we went from 112th place to top 10. In the same period of time, number of SMEs in Georgia registered per year increased 5 times, from approximately 3,500 to 17,000. Can you imagine this transformation? I mean, most likely, what was done in 2006 when these reforms wasn't in place, most likely either these people were doing the business underground in a black economy, or they were just not doing anything. They just gave up of registering company or contributing to the world economy. So when I mean structural reforms, first of all, I mean business environment reforms. I believe that many reforms from that point of view in Macedonia has been done, but I believe that more can be done. I believe that especially for SME needs, some labor code and labor regulation changes can be introduced, and also I believe that tax regulations tax administrative regulations can be introduced. In Georgia, we saw a huge progress as well in tax reforms. We saw by decreasing taxes from 21 to 6, make it all of them simple, make all of them taxes flat, relatively low. We saw a tax revenue increase in Georgia from 7% of GDP to 24% of GDP in 8-9 years' time. So what I mean by tax reform, I not necessarily mean decreasing taxes or increasing taxes. I mostly mean simplification. And the more simple the taxes are, we believe that less percentage is there for corruption, less chance is there for corruption, and more willingness is there for private sector to pay taxes fully. So also, when we talk about taxes, also very important reform in Georgia, we believe, was where we created more or less independent tax internal dispute resolution board, which was a board overseeing dispute resolutions between taxpayers and tax department, which was maximally fair and would do the job in maximum short period of time. So this is actually what I mean by structural reforms. Also, what I mean by structural reforms is restructuring state-owned enterprises. In most of the countries, actually, let me put it this way, in all of the countries, almost, state-owned enterprises are inefficient. They cannot be efficient. It's their nature. They cannot possibly be efficient. In many cases, privatization of state-owned enterprises is the key. In some cases, like we did in Georgia, we actually made state-owned enterprises to issue the Eurobonds, and we managed the bonuses, structures, and management fees based on a spread between state-owned enterprise and sovereign Eurobond on the stock exchange. So it wasn't government measuring their performance, it was the world financial institutions, the world London Stock Exchange actually, and investors on London Stock Exchange measuring this performance of state-owned enterprises. PPP projects. I know that in many countries PPP projects have gone wrong. And PPP is a very delicate thing. If you go into PPP and if it's bad, it's like bad marriage. You cannot get out of that without big costs, and you don't want to be in that. So it's like a very difficult situation. So I believe that if PPP managed properly, it can be hugely beneficial for the country. It can be hugely beneficial for the growth. It can be one of the structural reforms that I'm talking about. Just one example about PPP, we signed a PPP agreement in healthcare in Georgia, which envisaged few things in it. One was that we were getting rid of all state hospitals because it was run so inefficiently. We were giving them almost for free to private sector. Private sector was obliged to invest in these healthcare institutions within 18 years' time, and according to the European standards, bring all the technologies, and they had to work with the staff to upgrade the staff, and also invest some more infrastructure. What happened based on this PPP? Within 18 months' time, we had actually 150 new hospitals. Small and medium size, but 150 new hospitals, which was a major milestone in our healthcare reform. So PPP projects, well-balanced, well-managed PPP fund, which we created in Georgia, which supports large infrastructure investments in the country, can be also very important driver for reforms and driver for growth. This is also what I call structural reform. And finally, and this is my last part, is public services. Public service, when I talk about public services, I already mentioned that, but there is one very important thing that to understand. Georgia was one of the most corrupt countries in the world in 2003, according to Transparency International. Actually, if there was any kind of competition, Georgia was the one. Okay? No, I'm absolutely serious. If there was a world championship, we would win any single championship every year. 129 countries were measured in 2003, and Georgia came up to 125th. Only countries that were behind us were Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Tajikistan. Can you imagine that? Yeah? Only 7 years later, Georgia was amongst top 50 least corrupt countries. Only 6 or 7 years later, when Transparency International measured and asked the question, have you or a member of your family paid bribe? In Georgia, only 4% said yes. EU average was 5%. And that was majorly, by the way, done through serious changes and serious reforms in public services. If you don't reform the public services, you will not be able to fight corruption. If you don't reform the public services, you won't be able to actually advance your country, advance the economy. And there are only two things that I want to mention here which worked amazingly well in Georgia. These are silence is consent principle and one government principle. I think I've mentioned this to Mr. Zafirovsky when we were talking, but I want to mention this one more time because this was an amazing combination which, when put together, had amazing result. And I'll give me just a couple of minutes to explain that. In the past, when somebody would come to civil servant for any kind of service, it would take weeks, sometimes months to get an answer. Plus, you had to go to some kind of different agencies, pay many bribes, stand in many lines, and get 10 or 12 different signed papers and stamped papers for very simple service. For example, if you wanted to start a new company, you had to go to 9 different agencies. Ministry of Interior, that you don't have crime record, tax department, that you don't have any back taxes, Department of Statistics to register there, Department of Register, and so on and so on. So you had to go there everywhere yourself. With one government principle, what we said that if any agency wants to get any information, he or she has to get it himself. They don't have any right to get this, to ask citizen or ask private sector to get the information, for them to bring any paper from different state agencies. They had to do it themselves. So if register wants to see if this individual has a tax arrears, they had to go and ask tax department themselves, and if they want to ask if this person has any criminal record, this department has to go and ask Ministry of Interior themselves. That was one significant mindset change for our public services. And second was silence is consent. Silence is consent means that if somebody is applying for permit and there is no answer within 20 days, it's yes. If somebody is applying for license and there is no answer in 30 days, the answer is yes. That's it. Now, if you put these two reforms together, you will realize that our public servants became under totally different stress. In the past, they were the kings of the situation. They could direct the applicants to different agencies. They could take as much time as they wanted. In most of the cases, they would actually take bribe in order to tell them in which stage the application was, because sometimes the applications were lost. And now the situation was totally different. Now they had to run around themselves to get all this information that was according to the rules and regulations that they thought of themselves, and they had limited time. And if they couldn't come up with this on time, they could have been fired. So this is when actually our public civil servants start thinking differently. And this is when actually they started coming up with new reforms, when we put this kind of regulation on top of the public servants. And this is when we actually started to have totally innovative public services and totally innovative public structure. Right now, Georgia has public service hall in every city where almost all public services can be done in one place. So you want to register property, you want to register business, you want to register marriage, you want to register death, want to get a passport, ID, anything, almost anything that a citizen or a private sector wants to get from government is done under one roof, in one place, and it's done in a very short period of time, very efficiently. So when I talk about, just to finish my thoughts, so when we are talking about the current challenges in the world, when we are talking about the current situation where most likely we will not be seeing fast growth that the region and the world had in the past 2 decades. And every country has to fight for additional percentage of the growth, has to fight for additional investments, has to fight for additional tourists, and so on and so on. In this kind of very challenging environment, I believe that governments have very limited tools left. And these limited tools are actually fiscal tools and structural reforms. I believe that with these reforms, any country, especially Macedonia, who has very good track record of driving reforms, can achieve a very successful next few years, next future. Thank you very much.
Dobro jutro, dame I gospodo. This is just to show that I also can speak Macedonian, which I'm very proud. I learned it not so far ago, but I had actually one lecture in Macedonian, which starts with a thought that always talking in Macedonia for me is also a very special emotional moment, because my father was coming to Slovenia and I'm coming back, actually maybe doing some business here. Second, before the introduction, when I had this conversation with Robert just a couple of days ago, I thought he will solve the problem how to present and what to present. In fact, after 2-hour conversation, I was more perplexed than I was before the conversation. So then I started to make this conversation, and I hope I'm coming with the right type of with the presentation, which actually I divided in 2 parts. In the first part, it's more what Slovenia did in the last 20 years, 25 years after the independence. And maybe in the second part, it will be a small contribution to the metrics, the dashboard of Macedonia2025. And later on, I think we have some time for conversation so that I can make an additional maybe examples of what we did in Slovenia. I was actually a part with a lot of these processes since I was coming back from United States in 1994, and then for maybe 20 years I was a part of the Slovenian different initiatives, being in the government and so on. Is this moving? Okay. Now, because I didn't know where to start after, so that's, Robert, that's your fault. I started, okay, let's do about some facts. And I was thinking because a couple of weeks ago I was in Belgrade and I've seen my assistants talking to the assistants of my professor in Belgrade in English. And that's something we would never foreseen years ago. And I said to my assistant, but why don't you speak maybe Serbian or some other language? He said, we don't speak Serbian. We just we have this conversation in English. And I said, oh, my God, it's a lot of things happened during these 20 years, a lot of things. So it was now a completely different generation. So maybe they didn't know what was going on before. And we have to be aware, you know, that Europe and living in Europe, it's always about wars and borders. Sorry to say that, you know, but also, you know, about, you know, potential progress. And I said, you know, maybe it's a time, you know, to make some facts about Slovenia, because maybe when we were living in Yugoslavia, that was not the issue. Now, we became independent in Slovenia from Yugoslavia June 25, 91. It was the time when I was in the United States and we were helping our ambassador, writing letters to the White House, you know, let's go for independence and so on. And later on, when I came to Slovenia in 94, you know, basically President Drnovšek invited me the first time in the government to lead the sector for industry. And we actually came out with a strategy for, which we called strategy for increasing the competitiveness of the manufacturing sector. It was like 1,000 pages publication, basically going all around all sorts of statistics, all sorts of analytics and so on for years. That was served as a booklet for foreign investors. I think that's one of the things that every country should do, because for me, politics is not just something that you put and you just do it, but it has to lie on certain analytics as, let's say, as hard as possible. Because, you know, politics by itself is more art for me than science, but it should be based on science, it should be based on analytics. So for every sound politics, for any sound decision in politics, you know, analytics is a crucial thing for me. Now, we became, during this period, members of EU, NATO, IMF, and OECD. All these processes were pretty different, you know. If you look at this, these are really mega structures, I always say, like European Union, NATO, and so on, and people would like to think that these are more or less similar. In fact, in reality, if you've been involved in the processes of being a member of EU, the process of NATO, they're very different. For example, I was in the government when we entered the European Union in 2004, and let me tell you, this so-called acquis communautaire, which is like a common market, this different directives for introducing foreign market in Slovenia was very painful, because we had to translate tons of pages and tons of different directives to become part of the legislative body of Slovenia. So that was very painful. I remember I almost had a strike at the ministry, because at that time I was Minister for Labor. At one time in August, you know, there are a couple ladies coming and said, "Minister, we're not going to do this anymore." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" "Well, we cannot do it anymore, and we are thinking going on strike." And I said, "Well, this will be the first strike probably within the ministry." And I said, "Well, how should I explain that to the Prime Minister?" I said, "Well, that's your problem." Okay, then I started to negotiate, you know, quote unquote, with them, and finally we started to restart this process of translating the different parts of legislation and so on. NATO was a different thing. In Slovenia, only 56% of the people voted for entrance to NATO, as opposed, you know, for example, to the European Union, with more than 90% of the people were in favor for entering the European Union. NATO was a very close call. And I was in the Social Democratic Party, which was very crucial in terms of making the decision of entering or not entering to NATO. And there were probably every single general or president of the country of the NATO coming to Slovenia and explain to the people of Slovenia why should we enter the NATO. Now, IMF, we became one of the most developed countries of the IMF also. We were placed, I think, in 2003 as the 29th country in the IMF by the rank, which was, for a small country like Slovenia with no previous serious records, was pretty interesting, and was, I think, an accomplishment. OECD, we started also, I was the first time in the government, you know, in '96 in Paris. I still remember that people that were questioning us, you're people from Czech Republic. And we said, my God, look at this, you know, Czech Republic is a member of OECD and we are not, and we are actually questioning us. For us, Slovenia, because in terms of foreign policy, we were not in favor for the so-called Visegrad Group, because President Drnovšek was not in favor for that. And now Visegrad Group, a member of the Visegrad Group, was questioning us, you know, about entrance to the OECD. And for a long time, we were not a member. Only in 2011, we became a member of OECD, because for OECD, the most important thing is the transparency of the capital flows. So those were actually four things or four megastructures that Slovenia accomplished in this, let's say, 20 years. Now, that's the GDP. It's fairly high, and in euros, it's getting higher because the US dollar is getting stronger. So that's one thing. Now, if we move on. About some facts, we believe this, I said something about this entering to European Union. From the slide you can see that we started an association agreement with the European Union in '96. we started actually going to Brussels like we did in Belgrade. So we said, well, now there one B is now replacing the other B. So before we went to Belgrade, now we're going to Brussels. And actually, at the time we were starting to go to Brussels, there were no direct flight for Slovenia. And I remember that every time we were coming back to President, and we said, well, President, why don't we start a direct line, from Slovenia to Brussels, because we're losing a lot of time. So after 2 or 3 years, actually, the new line, direct line from Ljubljana to Brussels was established, and then we were happy for a while. Now, in terms of position of Slovenia, if you look historically, Slovenia was a part first of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was the least developed part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then coming, with the perturbation, becoming part of Yugoslavia, suddenly we were the most developed. So in that sense, we were lucky, for a while again, because like I said, in Europe, everything is about wars and borders, so the borders changed and we became most developed part of Yugoslavia and of course most industrialized. And we benefited from that, in the first, let's say, SHS, SHS, and also in Yugoslavia. But then when we became independent from Yugoslavia in 1990, 1991, like I said, suddenly we lost 40 to 50% of the markets. And that was very painful. Because Živko knows, for example, that one of our biggest pharmaceutical companies, Krka, basically it's 90% to Russia. Basically it's 90% of the exports to Russia. So it's well dependent on the Eastern markets, more than on the Western markets. So we were faced one of the biggest challenges probably in the history of Slovenian economic development, and that was how to substitute the markets, because we lost a lot of markets. And also the gas is coming from Russia, it's not coming from the West. So we were pressured, in terms of energy policy, and also in terms of exports. And I remember I was State Secretary for Industry from 95 to 97. We are facing that challenge. A lot of bankruptcies, a lot of unemployments and so on, layoffs, etc. So it was a big problem, a lot of economic problems in Slovenia, especially because Slovenia, before in Yugoslavia, we had only 2% of unemployment rate, so there were virtually non-unemployed people. And suddenly, woof, there are 15, 20% level of unemployment. So it was a completely new situation. So what to do? A lot of new programs, a lot of programs for layoffs, a lot of restructuring, a lot of retrainings, a lot of education, and so on. So a very, very tough time. And thankfully, in '93, there was an upturn of growth rate from -3. We suddenly got 11% growth rate in manufacturing sector. Of course, also the foreign and external factors helped us. A lot of new investments started, etc. Now, the second thing was this substitution of the markets. And you remember, people, directors, presidents, CEOs, and so on, they were all somehow, how should I say, they were used to doing business in Eastern markets. And now suddenly, well, we have to do it with more intensive with Germany, more intensive with France, more intensive with Italy, United States, and so on. So we tried to find a new niche. But remember, previously, we were on, let's say, not so competitive markets like they were Eastern markets. Suddenly we are faced, with the hard time competition on the Western markets. It's a completely new philosophy and so on. So one product that were very successful, for example, in Russia, Bulgaria, and so on, now you have to place it in France, Germany, and so on, very tough markets. So slowly we had to adapt, and that in the beginning of the 90s, but in 96 when we signed the association agreement with the European Union, my God, we started to learn the hard way. I mean, we thought, wow, European Union, that's Paris, that's Berlin, that's, big cities. But in fact, it was hard work. Now we started to go to Brussels and, hey, technical standards there, this standards there, this standards there. So we said, my God, this European Union is only everything is all about standards. So we had to standardize our production, standardize our products. Suddenly the toys, the most difficult directive was for toys. Toys should not be this, toys should not be that. So the kid should not swallow it, should not taste it, should not that. So we suddenly realized, that the tomatoes, too big, too small, and so on, they have to be the right shape, the right rounded, and so on. My God, it was, oof, what to do? Now, finally, we had to adapt. Slowly, we had to adapt. A lot of goings to Brussels, a lot of thinking, a lot of educating, training, and so on. So we finally made it like I said, in 2004. One thing that you mentioned, what was the thing, was we learned that we had to adapt to the system, which is a European Union system, and there are a lot of systems. That's not only one. Now, well, economy, then actually we entered the European Union very shortly. I said already in this upturn in 93, 94, thankfully. And then we became the member of the European Union. And we thought, now we are saved. Now we are there, so we have to relax. In reality, it was just the opposite. No relax. It was hard work. Now, basically, we were somewhere in the middle, of the developed countries of the European Union, somewhere always in the middle. So our growth rate after the entrance to the European Union was from 4 to 6%, around 5%. Mostly, generated by the foreign exports, mostly to Germany, 36% of our export structure to Germany, about 20 to 25 is to Croatia, depends on the energy problem with Krško, with the nuclear electrical power plant. Then to Italy, about 20%, and the rest is, to different countries. So, in fact, we have very concentrated our export structure, which is very bad, because it makes us very vulnerable. Because the cycluses in different countries, will make us very vulnerable. Now, after a very successful period to 2007, the crisis came, and the crisis was very hard, and we are still not yet out of it, to say. And the problem that I was invited to the government for the third time in 2008 by the current president of the Republic. And I said, my God, 6 years in the government for me is enough. That's 15% of my lifetime, so I have to refuse. But, so I didn't want to take the position as a minister, but I took the position of the advisor to the energy sector. But the problem was, that there was a big investment coming, so I said, well, I cannot deal with this, all the lobbyists and so on. So, yeah, the time is there, and I have to finish. But increasing debt is a real problem now of the Slovenian economy. Now from around 20% of the GDP, now we came into 80%, and we have to do it, I think, once again. So to make the long story short, I think what made Slovenia successful in the first part, till let's say 2008, 2009, was that we are very focused to the European Union. Remember, the president of our government, President Drnovšek, was very focused. And once we started to talk something else, he said, well, Vlad, but you should, focus on EU. Secondly was education. Now around 20% of the people are educated, high level of education. And the third thing, it's export orientation, because as a small country, Slovenia have to make, maybe Gorenje is one of the biggest companies in Slovenia. In 5 days, they produce in 5 days for Slovenian market, and the rest, 360 days, is actually for export. I have a lot of things to say, Robert, but you're the guilty one, because you made a lot of things. Now I prepared some metrics, but maybe they will be on the web. And maybe we can do it on the discussion. And thank you for your attention, and maybe you have some time to make a presentation.
I know I have to be short, so don't worry. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you and discuss with you. And I thank Macedonia 2025, especially Ljubljana, for inviting me to be here. And I give a special thanks to Robert for the very fruitful discussion we had during the process of shaping my presentation. I prepared my presentation together with my daughter Ioniada. She is a PhD candidate at the University of Sussex School of Global Studies, and I thank her for her commitment and for the contribution, and especially for giving some American and British thoughts to my traditional Balkan way of addressing the issues. I come from public sector and from the academia, and from both positions, I've understood how substantial is the engagement of diaspora in promoting and creating synergies in the economic and social and cultural development of the country. Of course, the Macedonia 2025 will be a pool of ideas and of lessons learned, and it will be at the end of my presentation. I will discuss with you what I learned during this, during the cooperation and during my engagement for this summit and for this presentation. You know that Balkans and Albania, as part of the Balkan countries, has a huge migration flow. It's the biggest migration flow in the region. More than 35% of the active population, and Albania, the community of Albanian migrants is actually greater than the labor force of the country. So it's a very special case. And I know that Macedonia also has a huge migrant flows. Now we are affording the idea of how to maximize the profits from and the benefits from this phenomenon and from the migration capitals. Migration of Albanians, differently from the migration flows from other countries, started as a very illegally, and it took time to be transformed from illegal flows into legal. And it happens in parallel with the improvement of the legislation, migration framework and institutional capacities in two most popular Albanian migrant receiving countries, which are Italy and Greece. And it took almost 2 decades that Albanian migrants in all standing countries, but especially in Greece and Italy, to become sponsors of the economic development and of the welfare system in both countries, because research on migration shows that migrants usually take about 15 years to be transformed from a burden to welfare systems into a sponsor of the welfare system in receiving countries. And in parallel with that, the contribution of Albanian migrants towards the development of Albania was increased. Actually, the migration policies, and there is an increasing sensibility of the government towards creating synergies between migration and development. And the aim of this, even Albania is organizing the Diaspora Summit in November, but differently from what is happening in Macedonia, it's organized by the government. And the government is the principal actor, and it's a pity that the government is only the principal actor of the country's efforts to mobilize diaspora and to create synergy between the migration and development in the country. So the aims of this policy are to promote the sustainability of the diaspora and the migrant communities in the receiving countries, and to help them and attract them to be promote their integration in Albania's development, and of course, maintaining their ethnic, cultural identity in the receiving countries. So, if we talk about the opportunities of the contribution of diaspora, Albanian diaspora in the country's development, we have to consider both migration capitals, both financial and human and social and symbolic capitals. But in Albania happened that we have mostly been attracted by overemphasizing the financial capitals and letting aside the human, social, and the values migrant communities and Albanian diasporas are gaining in the receiving countries. And we have not been able to incorporate these social and human values into our efforts to improve the labor force quality in the country. Of course, talking about we have had, during the last 25 years, huge remittance flows from the migrant communities in Greece, Italy, and the United States and other EU member countries. And in Albania, remittances have consisted of from 9 to 15% of GDP, 200% of exports, about 30% of the imports, and about 15% of family incomes. So, and Albania, and this is a contradictory situation, has a huge contribution from the migration capitals, but has a very strong dependency from remittances, which is good, but which is even bad for the country, because the country, in order to help to promote development, has to mobilize the internal resources. And for example, we compare the Albanian dependency from the remittances with India, which is the biggest remittance recipient in the world, where, for example, in 2007, when India had 30 euros per capita in year, Albania had 300 euros, 10 times greater than the dependency greater than India. And if we speak about the correlation between remittances and foreign direct investment, FDIs, until 2010, the remittances have been bigger. We have had more remittances rather than FDIs in the country. And the turning point is the year 2010, when the FDIs started to give more contribution to the country's development rather than remittances. And so the lesson learned here is that we have to go for increasing foreign direct investment to the country and to help the country escape from the strong dependency from remittances. And if we talk about the correlation between the remittances and exports, it was that until 2008, the remittances, we have had more remittances than exports. In 2008, it's the turning point when the exports are becoming greater and the incomes from exports are greater than incomes than remittances. And this is a good news because it demonstrates that the country is moving towards a productive economy, and the lesson is that we have to go for to increase the productivity of economy and promoting and increasing the exports. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, during this being engaged in my preparation and being informed about what in Macedonia is being done for creating the synergies between the diaspora contribution and the development of the country, I would like to share with you some lessons I learned. The first lesson is that both countries, as all the countries of the region, we have huge migration flows. In Albania, we have 1/3 of the population, actually, migrants. So the lesson is that we cannot make it without diaspora. So the country, we cannot have a normal economic, social development of the country without diaspora being engaged and being transformed into an engine of the country's development. The second is that diaspora engagement is not a political issue. It's an economic, it's a development, it's a national, it's an economic, and it's a development issue. The third lesson is that diaspora involvement cannot be done without the engagement of the private sector, which, and the Macedonia2025 demonstrates this, and the private sector should be the real engine of the diaspora mobilization. And the fourth lesson is that diaspora mobilization, it's not means self-mobilization. So diaspora and migrants community cannot be mobilized if or when the government requires this. It would be efficient and effective and will have a huge impact on country's development when it is, as Macedonia2025 demonstrates, a self-mobilization. And in the process, we have to afford even the fragmentation between new and old diaspora, as it happened in the case of Albania. Thank you.
So, thank you very much to the three of you. So, by listening to these three panelists, hopefully you recognize a lot of the same, three different issues. Nika talked about corruption, effectiveness of the policy of the public servants. Vlado talked about transitioning the economy from one system to another, the challenges and what the government did and what the country had to do to kind of go from a kind of socialistic, economy exposed to the Eastern Bloc to kind of more Western-facing nation, how the country had to get repositioned. And then Kosta talked about Albania's challenges with migration flows. I mean, if you kind of take these three, four things, I'm sure you're going to recognize some of the challenges Macedonia is facing through some of the things that the three panelists covered. So I have some questions, but I would like to hear, we have some time. I would like to hear some questions maybe from the audience for the panelists and engage a little bit of a conversation. And if nobody asks a question, I'll definitely ask a question. So please, any takers for any of the panelists? Anyone? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Borja. Borja, just take the mic. Thank you.
Hi. I would like to ask the first panelist about the educational system. How do you enforce innovation, research and development, starting from the kindergarten to the universities in your country? And the second question is, how did you perform candidate selection in your teams and teams of your teams? Thank you.
Can you repeat a little bit louder the question, the second one, the second part?
The second part is, how did you perform candidate selection of your team?
Oh, how did you select the team?
It's on, yeah. About the education, definitely the biggest reforms came in education, and the biggest regret I have is that not devoting more resources and more time and more finances to education. That is the biggest regret I have as a former Prime Minister of my country. About the education reform, especially, I'll tell you one reform and you'll realize our mentality. I think we did similar reform that many European countries, but with some twist. And we always try to innovate something with some twists. So, for example, in the past, very important is the channeling of funds from government to education sector. What is the formula? And based on this formula, you can actually understand, does this country has a chance for better education system or not? Our formula in the past was in schools, was very simple. Minister and the Ministry of Education would decide which school gets how much. Based on what? I have no idea. Nobody knows. Based on who knew the minister better. Something like that. Afterwards, we came up with a new system, which is voucher financing, which many countries actually have, which I believe we had some little twist in the reform is the following. Voucher financing is that the money follows a student. Wherever a student goes, this is where the voucher is taken, and that school gets more money. So there is a competition between schools to attract more people, more students. So there is competition between school directors, and plus we took away any salary constraints. So there is a competition between school directors to attract better teachers, because better teachers attract more students. So there is actually motivation for teachers to be better, to be more attractive for students. So there is a competition between teachers as well. But also what we did was that we said that this voucher can be taken anywhere geographically in the country, plus in the private sector as well, which allowed to create private sector schools. And right now, private sector schools are approximately 20% of Georgian schools are private sector schools, which was only 1%, which provide much better education than state-owned schools. And we even started privatization of state-owned schools. So this kind of formula, for example, which we did in schools, was the fundamental of our education reform, which will have results only 10 years down the road. Education reforms have huge problems. Education reform has problems that it cannot have results in 2 or 3 years' time. It has results only in 7, 8, or 10 years' time. So we believe that this was a proper reform, which will have results in future. And we are actually seeing better results in education. About how we choose the team, I think the best way to describe it is meritocracy. We never chose a team based on party affiliations or based on friends or based on neighbors. We chose our team based on who was the best at that moment. By the way, I was Prime Minister of my country. I was never a member of any political party. I was Minister of Energy of my country. I was Minister of Finance of my country. I was never a member of any political party. By the way, when I was Prime Minister, approximately 50% of my government members were not members of any political party. They were just those people who were the best managers, or best implementators, or best policymakers at that point, who was available and who was willing to work for government. So I think this was opening up government to all the different people, instead of closing it down to party-affiliated people only, was one of the biggest achievements that we had, and which actually bears very significant fruits.
Thank you, Nika. In the middle? Yep.
Nika, my question is also for you. It was fascinating to hear you share a bit about how you began to pare down corruption in Georgia. And could you please elaborate on how you began that process on a granular level? When you enter into a situation like that, what are how do you motivate and inspire and achieve buy-in with government officials at the beginning? Because it seems like that's a really difficult thing to start.
Fighting corruption, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It has few different. I guess this is the most difficult challenge that any government faces. And if I'm proud of anything that we have done, number one thing that I'm proud of is that I was part of the team that fought corruption successfully in my country. It needs many different aspects. It cannot be written with one formula. Although in my book I'm trying to write with one formula, but it's never that easy. It definitely needs a leadership which is clean and which knows that they want to fight corruption. It needs a team that is capable of fighting corruption. And it needs, let's put it this way, carrot and stick approach. And both of them, carrot and stick, has to be well established. And everybody has to know about this. And what I mean by carrot and stick is the following. You cannot expect your public servants to be not corrupt if they are not paid well. Problem in Georgia in late 90s and early 2000s was that it was morally acceptable for public servants to take bribes because they were getting so little money that society agreed that these poor guys have to get bribes, otherwise they can't feed their families. So it was kind of when the public servant would wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, he or she would say that if I don't get bribes, I will not be able to feed my family. So it was, he would accept him morally that he had to take bribes. So unless you give these people good enough salary that they will be able to feed their families, it's impossible to demand from them not to be corrupt. So, and how do you understand what is in the good enough salary? It's very simple. What are their private sector vis-a-vis getting? What are their private sector vis-a-vis taking home? And that's maybe minus 20% of that because of public sector and so on, would be, I think, sufficient enough, good enough formula to have the first understanding. The second part of it is about this carrot is bonuses. Believe me, bonuses work amazingly well. Private sector, whoever he is here is from private sector, understands it well. It's been tested many times. It's been tested for decades. Why not in public sector? What's wrong with that? I mean, why so many governments are... I understand. Politically, it's very, very difficult to explain to population that I have to pay bonuses to my ministers. But let's put it this way. These ministers and these deputy ministers make decisions much tougher than most of the private sector employees. These ministers and these deputy ministers have much more responsibility for the whole country than private sector. So if we want the high quality people to take decisions for us, we had to give them at least the same amount that private sector CEOs or deputy CEOs are earning in our country. I'm not talking about Goldman Sachs private sector, private CEOs or deputy CEOs. I'm talking about our own, well, in your country. The second, but the other part of it is definitely stick. It's very clear. In the past, you wouldn't be punished to take bribe because your salary was so bad. But right now, let's make it very clear. You take a bribe, you go to prison. And in some cases, we actually were criticized a lot because the way for us, for example, to clean patrol service or to clean, for example, customs was actually to create a special department who would actually give bribe to customs officer. And if customs, with a camera. And if customs officer would take a bribe, he would go to prison. Hidden customer. Yeah, hidden customer, but mystery customer. Yes, mystery customer, but with much tougher agenda. Sure. Yeah. Not checking the quality of service, but checking whether or not you are a corrupt person. So it was very tough, by the way. But when I became Minister of Finance, my number one job was to clean customs department because it was the single most corrupt department in the region, maybe in the world. But after 9 months of these procedures, we had one of the cleanest customs departments in the region. So it's this kind of formula where you need clean and visionary head who knows and who has a political will to fight corruption. And by political will, I'm not saying only making statements, but also saying that nobody is protected. That kind of political will. Then you need a team who is capable of delivering it, and then you need this carrot and stick approach, and both of them have to be very visible and very well explained.
Mike? Oh, sorry.
Mike needs a mic.
Okay, sorry, one more question over there. That's okay, go ahead. We'll bring the mic here later. Yep.
Thank you very much. This question goes to Mr. Barjaba. You mentioned in your speech that the involvement of diaspora has to be not political but only economical. So my question would be, how realistic is this distinction in, let's say, in the Balkan area? Or to put it another way, what is the government doing to ensure this distinction between economical and political involvement of diaspora? Thank you.
Kosta, you want to answer this?
When I say that we need that diaspora mobilization and engagement to be not political, not only political, but mostly economical and from the development point of view, I consider the fact that mostly when in our countries, not only in Albania, we are talking about immigrants. During the first 10, 15 years, we were kept talking about immigrants in a very romantic way. As part of the country, as part of our population who is living abroad in a distance from the country. And we, of course, we certainly partly lived because of the migrants' capitals. And now actually, at least in Albania, one of the most substantial issues of the migration agenda is the migrant voting in being in the receiving countries. So to create them the right to vote. And my point of view is that before achieving this, we need migrants and diasporas to be engaged and to be self-engaged and as a source, actors, factors, and beneficiaries of the development of Albania. So they have to be part of part of the development agenda, of the economic development agenda, and then of political agenda. Because in this sense, will have a real synergy between their contribution to the country's development rather than talking about political rhetoric and that we love migrants and they have to contribute to the democracy. But of course they have to contribute to the democratic and they have to ensure the democratic and political participation, but being a considerable and very critical actor and source of the development. At least this is my point of my personal point of view.
Can we have I think Mike had a question here. Maybe Mike. Yep.
I mean, first of all, I want to thank all the speakers. Such a powerful and very relevant for Macedonia topic. So I probably have 10 questions for all of you. I know we're very time limited. So Vlado, I wish you had time to listen to your full presentation. But a question for you. I'm also very concerned how governments globally spend more money than what they have. You mentioned Slovenia had gone from 20 to 80% debt to the GDP. Any recommendations from Macedonia, either stick or a carrot approach, if you will, by the politicians? And any other recommendations from Macedonia? Both of us are 2 million, countries of 2 million people. You have a relationship with both of them, and obviously very different economic foundation for Macedonia. But again, recommendations on how to control spending more money than we have, and any other high-level recommendations for for Macedonia?
Again, it would be very difficult to answer all the details, of course, you know. So what happened, for example, in Slovenia after very high level of growth from, let's say, 2004, 2008, was a very high influx of money. So basically, Slovenia got a lot of possibilities to invest. Obviously, we didn't invest wisely. Now, what I was thinking for a small country like Slovenia, it would be very important to change the business model, which we didn't. So in 2008, 2009, when there was a drop of growth rate for 10 percentage points, we didn't change the model. So we had the same level of spending. We wanted to have the same model as before, which was a comfortable model. A lot of social and other expenditures. We didn't cut them off, and that was a big mistake. So afterwards, in 2009, every year we added maybe 10 to 12 percentage points to our external debt. And now we came from 20% to 80% of the GDP. And now the maneuver, I mean, how should I say, the possibility to redirect the strategy is very limited. So what we do is basically all the businesses got undervalued, and we got basically a lot of foreign investors, but not the healthy ones. So basically we got the ones that were picking, just because of the undervaluation of the businesses. And that was the problem of the 2008-2009. So my thinking is, for a small country like Slovenia and Macedonia for that matter, we have to be very flexible in terms of changing business models. Of course, in the GDP structure generation, Macedonia and Slovenia are different because Macedonia has a lot of possibility, for example, in agriculture, in food processing industry and so on, which for my understanding, they're not using properly. You're not using properly. I mean, there is a lot of possibility. We have a very good company like pharmaceutical company, Alkaloid, which could be a primer to other businesses when you can basically merge the tradition, technology, and possibilities of the future. And the second, which Macedonia, which we have the same problem in Slovenia, is high migration of brains, which happened in the last 3 years. As a professor, I'm writing every week the recommendation letters. Are people going to Germany, to Australia, to Canada, and so on? So I would like to keep them at home, but I mean, there's a personal choice. So how to keep people at home? The best people are now leaving the country. Like in Macedonia, like you, for example, for a while in Albania and so on. So we are losing those three things that I mentioned: focus of the strategy, then exports, because we are not changing, the markets fast enough, and thirdly, it's education. Now the most educated people are leaving the country. So these are the similarities, I would say, which I understand the situation in Albania, Macedonia, and Slovenia, the same.
Thank you very much. We went a little bit overboard. I know there's more questions, but I think we went a little bit overboard. I would like to we have a break and then go into the second panel. So again, thank you very much for attending the panel. Thank you.